Welcome to StealthGTI. I'm Scott. Thanks for being here. Today I'm going to talk about the engine casualty that we had during our 7,200 mile coast-to-coast road trip. If you joined us on that trip, then you already know what our symptoms were and my diagnostic attempts. Otherwise, let me go through my symptoms, diagnostic attempts, and then I will share the final diagnosis. We were towing a trailer for the trip. The trailer in my video series, I had incorrectly estimated its weight at around 1,200 pounds. The truth was it was closer to 1,000 pounds, maybe even as light as 900. One of my lazy habits driving manual transmissions is I will let the car run at too low of an RPM sometimes. Not to the point of lugging the engine. I don't do any of that, say 1,000 RPM, just barely above idle stuff. I'm talking about something that I got through 20 years of driving TDIs, driving the car at 1,500 RPMs. I don't necessarily follow what the dash is telling me. For example, right now I'm in fourth gear at 45 miles an hour and the computer wants me to be in sixth. I'm not going to do that, so I'm not compliant, but I am lazy. So if I'm in sixth gear doing 70 and then I slow down to 65 or 50, I don't always take it out of sixth gear until I know that I should. When towing a trailer, it should always come out of sixth gear much sooner than usual. In fact, it's probably best just to stay out of sixth gear unless you're really going fast, which you shouldn't be doing with a trailer anyway. So about, I want to say around 1,200 miles into the trip, maybe even more. No, it was around 1,200. 1,200 miles, we're driving somewhere in New Mexico and we're on a climb in sixth gear doing about 70, I think. And the car started to shudder a little bit. Then we had a flashing check engine light. So I backed off, downshifted, and the flashing check engine light went away. And after about a minute, the check engine light altogether went away. Now we were on the move, so I figured, all right, I'll pull codes on that later. I travel with an OBD11 scan tool, and for those of you who just don't know, I know what an OBD2 diagnostic port is. OBD11 is a diagnostic scan tool, and that is the name of the product. I will link something up here for you to go check out. Eventually, I was able to pull codes just out of curiosity. The car was driving fine after that one little hiccup, and it was telling me that I had a cylinder 3 misfire. I figured it was just one off because it didn't come back. And then about another, maybe 1,000 miles later, at this point we're in Arizona someplace climbing a mountain range. I had incorrectly reported that we were in Tehachapi, but we weren't. Later, as I was reviewing my video footage, I realized that's not where we were. So in Arizona, on a dark, twisty, I believe it was an interstate road, massive engine shuddering, check engine light flashing, EPC was on. I don't think the EPC light flashes, but the car clearly had a problem. Again, it was dark and twisty. My first instinct was to turn off the car and restart it because it was reminiscent of limp home mode or limp mode. I used to see that in the TDI from time to time because I used to tinker with the car and sometimes I'd overboost it and then I'd get the limp home. And all I had to do was just shut the car off, shut it off, turn it back on. I didn't even have to stop the car. I would just key off, key on, and I'm good to go. I couldn't do that in this car. I can, but again, we were on a dark, twisty highway in the mountains. I think we were climbing. There just was no place safe for me to do that because in this car, I can't speak for cars with a key ignition. I think with a key, I would just shut it off, turn it back on, and I'm good. This car's push button. And so if I push the button, first it's going to say, hey, are you sure you want to do this? And then I say, yes, do it. And then I hit it again, and all the lights and everything just shut off. And I can't have that, not at 70 miles an hour in the dark. So I found a safe place to pull over. And then, again, the car was just running terribly. So I restarted the car and everything was fine. I decided at that point to keep my RPMs up. If I kept the load light and the RPMs up, everything was fine. So I drove in fourth gear for the rest of the day, and that put me at 70 miles an hour. I think that put me around 3,000 RPM. So it wasn't terrible. I mean, higher than you really want to be driving for extended periods, but it's not terrible on the car. The only time the car gave me any trouble was if I got into the power a little too much. I will say more than about half throttle, half 50% load. I really don't know what number is appropriate, but it was whenever I was giving it the power. That's all I can say. I would get a shudder, flashing check engine light, EPC, everything would go haywire. So then I would just have to restart the car. And so I learned to drive around my problem. I had incorrectly reported and thought that I was driving on only 3 cylinders, because later when I pulled the codes, I was again getting the cylinder 3 misfire, but also a hide cylinder, which means that the computer is shutting off the fuel to that cylinder to protect it. And therefore I was assuming that I was driving on 3 cylinders, but that wasn't accurate. It was shutting off the other cylinder, cylinder number 3, during the times of malfunction. Once I restarted the car and got going again, everything, and drove lightly, the car was fine. Now, I was on a mission to California. My mother's memorial service was the following day, the day after I got into the state, and I didn't have a lot of time for consulting with the internet, ordering parts from my preferred vendor, or even going to a preferred garage for any sort of maintenance or anything. I was traveling with limited tools. I sort of concluded that I had a coil pack problem. Coil pack problems were very common. To me, they're just very common in the gas-powered engines altogether. Later, I learned otherwise, and I'll explain that in a minute. So the following day, which would be the morning of my mother's memorial, I drove up to Fresno to pick up some coil packs, and much to my disappointment, they did not have any. I ordered them. They showed up the next day. I was surprised that they didn't stock them, because to me, coil packs it's a consumable item. High fail, the dealer should have had them. But I learned differently later. Give me a minute. So I took the coil packs. I went back to the next day, the day after the memorial service, and skipped some of my attractions that I wanted to go see. Replaced the coil packs in the parking lot at the VW dealer. I'm sure they loved that. And that didn't fix my problem. So at this point, we're at the VW dealer with an undiagnosed problem. All right, let's take it in and see what they have to say. And I wasn't really happy about that, but at least I was going to get some competent eyes on it. The dealer was very accommodating. He got me right in right away. He understood that I was traveling away from home and needed to get home. And so he got me in pretty quickly. Within an hour, they did some of the things that I didn't think of. Simple things, really. I gotta remind you, if you don't know, I spent over 20 years driving TDIs, and I literally forgot how to troubleshoot a spark engine. So I didn't think of the simple stuff like swapping coil packs, say number 3 and number 4. And then when that didn't work, swapping the spark plugs, number 3 and number 4. The idea is to see if the fault moves from the number 3 cylinder to the number 4 cylinder. When the mechanic did that, my fault did not move. So then he said that he ran a borescope into the cylinders to check them for damage. Oh, before he ran the borescope, he did a compression test and leak down. I think those are done at the same time. I've done compression tests on my diesels, but never a leak down. I don't know how the leak down works. I think the leak down test is just seeing how long the cylinder holds pressure. Somebody comment below if you know, if I got that right. And anyway, the compression test and leak down tests were not just with intolerance, but they were also very good. Then he did the bore scope inspection to make sure I hadn't melted any pistons or had any damage inside cylinder number 3. I think he checked all the cylinders, and everything looked good. From there, this is where things got kind of weird. He wanted to replace the fuel pump and its control board. Now, if I back up a little bit, I had told him that I was APR tuned, and that I made it very clear, do not flash my ECU. So he knew that the car was tuned. What he wasn't sure of, he said that the fuel pump was only outputting between 4 and 6 bar, and that it should have been putting out 8. And so what he told me was he wasn't sure if the APR tune was affecting that with a sensor trick. And let me explain the sensor trick in layman's terms. Let's say that normal fuel pressure output is 8 bar, but APR wants 10. So what they could do, I'm not saying this is what they do, I'm just saying what they could do is put a voltage change or adjustment to indicate, make the ECU think that the fuel pump is outputting only 6 bar when it in fact is putting out 8 bar, to trick it into outputting 10. I hope that makes sense. So he wasn't certain if APR was doing that or not. So his recommendation was to replace the fuel pump and its controller. He did not have the tools on hand to check actual output. He was only telling me what the reported output was, and he didn't have the diagnostic equipment on hand to discriminate between the fuel pump and its controller. So he just wanted to replace them both. That was going to cost $750. No thank you. By the way, their hourly labor rate there was $165 an hour, so I'm just hemorrhaging money while they're guessing. He also told me that if replacing the fuel pump and its controller didn't fix the problem, that they were going to get on the phone with VW technical assistance and get some help from higher ups. And that if he did that, that they would require the car to be returned to stock. Now, if I was at home and a mechanic told me that he had to return this car to stock, I have all my stock parts and can do it. So, but now I'm over in California, 3,000 miles away from my stock parts. And so that was just a non-starter for me. No way. And by the way, remember when I said that they didn't have any parts on hand? Well, they didn't have this fuel pump or fuel pump controller either. It was Friday, and the earliest they were going to have the parts available was Monday. So that was going to have me in California for 3 extra days, only to find out that the parts that they replaced didn't fix my problem. And I knew they wouldn't, because I asked them, if it was the fuel pump, how would it only affect cylinder number 3? Wouldn't a fuel pump create problems across all 4 cylinders? And he did not have a satisfactory answer to that. So I asked him if the car was safe to drive. He said yes. So I said, please button it up and get it out. I'm taking it home. I called my mechanic over in Virginia and explained to him what was going on. And he immediately jumped right to the number 3 fuel injector. And he didn't understand how a mechanic worth his salt didn't eliminate every possibility of cylinder number 3. I'm not sure if the VW mechanic was new or being lazy, or just if they were just trying to bleed money out of me. All I know is I'm glad that I had, although I was rusty on my diagnostic of spark engines, I'm glad I had enough knowledge to understand that they were going down the wrong path. If I was just some driver who had no idea how the car worked, I would have been buying a bunch of crap there that I didn't need and shelling out who knows how many thousands of dollars. So I drove the car back to Virginia. I had learned to drive around my problem. I stayed in fourth gear on the highway, fifth if it was flat and the speed limit was, say, 70 miles an hour. And then when I got home, I took my car to my mechanic. For those of you who might be interested, my mechanic is Europros in Yorktown, Virginia. They immediately went to work. Bam, number 3 injector. They replaced all of the injectors because I was thinking, it seemed to me, the perfectionist to me, seemed like you would want to replace all 4 of them at the same time so that they would be balanced. But his thought was, dude, you just had an injector fail. You don't want to go through all the work taking everything apart and getting them all out to replace just one, and then a month later had another one fail. So just replace them all. Intake manifold's got to come off. That would have been a great time for cleaning the intake if it was necessary, but my intake was already cleaned. While they were taking everything apart, I have an ECS skid plate under the car, so it's silver, right? While they had everything open, they look down and they see coolant on the skid plate. Remember, I've been looking for a mystery coolant leak for a very long time, and that shop had inspected everything before our trip, and nothing was there. So finally, it's either a coincidence, either I had that very slow leak that just was inconsequential, and now something finally blew up, or the leak finally grew large enough to be detectable. They replaced the thermostat, water pump, and the housing. So the bill was kind of up there. Got the car back out on the road and warmed it up, and man, it drives like it's like a scalded cat. It was nice. And some of that is because I have restored performance. Maybe with the nice shiny new injectors, the car, is flowing more fuel and it's just flowing. The car's just driving faster. But what it could also be is, if you don't tow trailers, you won't understand. Well, you can understand if I describe it to you, but you won't appreciate the sensation unless you've done it. When you tow a trailer, even if it's just 100 miles, much less 7,200 miles, you get used to the way the car accelerates and handles with a trailer in tow. And then when you drop that trailer or uncouple the trailer and start driving without it, the car feels fast and free and eager to just go. And so with all that newfound freedom, the car just felt fantastic. I mentioned earlier that I would comment on the availability of parts. I was under the assumption that coil packs are consumable items, and apparently on the Mark IV, 5, and 6 they are. They were all of a very similar design with only minor differences in their measurements to get them to fit through the applicable valve cover. I think probably on the B5 and B6 Passat, they probably used a similar design as well. And these coil packs were just known to have problems. Apparently, they are very robust on the EA 888 engines. So not nearly the problems, and therefore it's sensible that Volkswagen dealerships would not stock them. Why stock them if they never need to be replaced? And of course, when I say never, I really meant seldom. My mechanic says that he has replaced plenty of them for customers who are looking for an upgrade, but very seldom does he replace failed coil packs. So now I have 4 spare coil packs. They're old, 116,000 miles on them, but apparently they're still good. So I will save them as spares that will just get me out of trouble if something actually does happen to these. I have replaced them, as I mentioned in a previous video, with factory coil packs. There are those who claim that the factory coil packs will blow up when subjected to a tune. I have not had a problem with my coil packs blowing up, so I have no issue with the factory coil packs, I'm happy to use them, happy to recommend them. I had commented earlier in another video about expenses on the road trip, and this was not caused by the trailer. I thought it could have been. I thought it was a consequence of towing in the mountains, but it just wasn't. It was just a coincidence that I was on a road trip pulling a trailer when the injector failed. And I think the nature of its failure, I'm going to speculate here, because the car drove normally at economical speeds, I will say, sedate driving, the injector was probably working fine at regular fuel flow demands. It was when I needed more fuel to accelerate up a mountain or pull a load up a mountain, the injector was incapable of delivering that demand, answering that demand for more fuel, and therefore it was unable to balance with the other injectors, and that was what caused my problem. Therefore, I don't think that all of this diagnostic charge and repair was an expense of the trip. It was an expense associated with owning this car. Those of you with imports, tell me what a piece of junk this car is and how your car would have never had this problem, because Japanese injectors never fail. I've never had an injector problem before, so this is really new to me, but easy enough to diagnose for a mechanic, a competent mechanic, and then repair. Hopefully, I'm on the road to another 116,000 miles at least before my next failure. I will let you know if anything else happens. I appreciate you being here, and I'll see you next time. Take care.